I'd like to talk a little bit about guilt, and there are two questions that I want to ask you and address. One, what are your triggers that make you feel guilty? And two, how do you manage it so it doesn't get in the way of providing permanency, safety, and protection of the children in your care? I'll ask you a question. Let me start off with a question because I always kind of do that with you. Your initial attachment and bonding was with who first? The children in your care or the children's parents?
The parents.
All right, I'll ask it again, and because I already got an answer. I think you already know where I'm kind of going with this. But your initial experiences of who you held, who you fed, who you played with, who you crawled with, who did you do that first with? The child in your care or their parents? Yeah, the parents, the birth parents. When you now have to place the needs of the children before that of the birth parents, how does that make you feel? Guilty. Mm-hmm. And who reminds you and makes you feel guilty?
The birth parents.
The birth parents. Okay. I'm going to ask you another question. When you feel guilty, you feel as though you deserve to be what? Punished. And if a caregiver feels guilty about what's happening to that birth parent or feels it's their fault that the children aren't with the birth parents, they're vulnerable to being punished by whom?
Themselves.
Themselves and who else?
The
The birth parents. Yeah. When a caregiver feels as though, hey, I've made up for those things, I've done my punishment, I've done everything I can do, I've done all the I'm sorries that I could say, and that you feel as though you don't owe anyone anything else, you then feel as though you deserve to be what? Punished. And for a caregiver, if you don't deserve to be punished, that means you're going to be able to set limits on who?
The birth parents.
The birth parents. That means being able to say no.
Boundaries.
Boundaries. So for kinship caregivers, it's important for you to be able to set limits and manage your guilt so that you could protect yourself from being abused and manipulated by whom?
Birth parents.
Birth parents. Because and if you can protect yourself, then you can protect who else?
The child.
Exactly. So you see how you've got to be able to live with the guilt and forgive yourself and be able to avoid those buttons being pushed, because you've got to be okay, again, for the children to be okay. So here are your goals. You got to learn to live with that guilt, whatever it is. And by guilt, I'm talking about the regrets, because we all have regrets. Whatever those regrets are, you've got to live with it. It could be maybe you got married too soon, maybe you had the children too soon, maybe you weren't as close to the children as you thought the birth parent as you thought you should have. Whatever the excuse is, whatever the regrets are, you've got to live with it, and then you have to forgive yourself. And then the most important one is know what those guilt triggers are. What's going to make you feel as though you owe? What's going to make you feel as though you have to make up for what you did? It's going to make you feel as though you maybe need to bend the rules a little bit. And then you've got to have a response so that you don't get manipulated, so that you don't manipulate yourself, because sometimes the triggers can come from your own self, okay? Because if you allowed yourself to be manipulated, you're vulnerable to letting that person manipulate who else? The child. Here's some conversations, here's some triggers. One trigger that you might hear or be said to you is, how can you live with yourself knowing what you did? Or the trigger might be, you can never make up for what you did in the past. And these are conversations you can have with yourself, or that could come from the caregivers or other family members. If that's the case, and you're thinking that or you're hearing that, then you need to be able to work on making sure that you can live with the past. And your conversation sounds like this. Okay, maybe I'm partially the blame for your situation. Maybe it's partly my fault, or maybe it's partly the family's fault that the children were taken from you. Maybe it's partly my fault that you didn't grow up to be the kind of person you were. But guess what? I can admit what I did. I've tried to make up for it as much as I can. I'm not making excuses for it. And the most important part is I've learned from the past so that I can do things differently now, and do things differently for who and with who? The child. That's how you learn how to live with your past. But that's a conversation you need to have for yourself. But you need to know what that trigger is going to be. What are they going to throw up? What might be said? What are the thoughts in your head that make you think that you shouldn't be allowed to be a kinship caregiver? Because that's what that's about. You're questioning your ability and your competency to be a kinship caregiver. Another trigger might be, you may have everyone else fooled, but I know you haven't changed. You're not any different now than you were in the past. You may be thinking that, or you may be hearing other family members or the birth parent may be saying that. You've got to validate your own growth. And these are your conversations. Look at how I'm different now, and I can prove it, because it's the proof that lets you know that you're different. I'm not using. I've been through rehab. I did my time. I'm now raising your child. I'm responsible. I'm recovered. Because you have the evidence now to show that you are different. And it's because of those things that you've done that you can list and think of. That's the evidence that's going to validate for you that you are not the same person now that you were then. Because you have to validate your growth. You can't expect that to come from anyone else. The triggers might be, I'll never forgive you. I'll never trust you regardless of what you do. I'll never let anyone else forget what you did. And the feeling is that no matter what you do, you'll never be able to do enough to get their forgiveness. That's the feeling. So conversations with yourself, I've earned the right to forgive myself because I'm now taking care of this child. I've earned the right to forgive myself because I'm now giving you a second chance. I've earned the right to forgive myself because I'm now better now than I was when I raised you. That's what makes kinship care work, by the way. You are better the second time around. I don't know if you know that. Yeah, I love your smiles because you know you are. Yeah, that's what makes kinship care work better, work, because you're better the second time around. Just like any parent, those first children are experimental. You know that. Okay? That's a horrible thing to say. So as a parent, you get better over time. Same thing occurs in kinship care. So you've got to be able to say, hey, I've forgiven myself, and you'll be able to, you can think specifically to what you do better. The other trigger may be, stop trying to replace me. I'm still the parent. You want my child to love you more than me. You know what can trigger that sometimes? It was when the kids start calling you what? Mom. Your goal here is you've got to accept those new roles and live with the guilt. And your conversation with that is, if not, then who? That's the conversation you need to have. It sounds like this. If you can't take care of them, then who can? If you're not here to go to the IEP meetings, then who? If you're not here to go to the educational planning meetings and to make the appointments with the school, if I don't go, then who else is going to go? If you're not here to take care of the children and get them ready for preschool, if it's not me, then who? That's the conversations that you need to have with yourself. And then there's even the kind of, if not now, then when? I've got to get them ready for preschool. If you're not here to get them ready for preschool, then if not me, then who? I've got to teach the child how to walk, which means I've got to teach them how to crawl. And if you're not here to do that with them, if not me, then who? That's an bonding and attachment process, because that's why they start calling you mom and dad. You're down there on the floor, you're with them. But yeah, you've got to be able to live with that. So, in summary, placing the needs of the children before that of the birth parents may cause you to feel very guilty, but you may not have any other choice. You must recognize what those triggers are. What are the buttons? What are the regrets that you can either push yourself or can be pushed by the caregivers? Because you have to be able to protect yourself from being abused or manipulated or mistreated. And in order to take care of the children, you have to first be able to take care of yourself. And the other thing that happens is, If the children see how you take care of yourself and protect yourself, guess who else is able to protect themselves? The child, because they're now learning that from you. Okay? All right, thank you.